What is going on? Welcome back to another episode of It's a Blast podcast. My name's Mike, also known as the EOD Happy Captain on X. Today, I'm sitting down with Joe Czikalla, a medically retired EOD technician who had a hell of a career. He was the first EOD tech on the ground to respond to Extortion 1-7 when it was shot down. He's removed live ordnance from a human being on his deployments and has done everything in between. It's a pretty heavy episode. Let's get started. Welcome to the It's a Blast podcast. My name is Mike. Here, I talk to members of the veteran and military community about their leadership style and how the military has affected their lives. Let's get started. What is going on? I am sitting down with Joe Czikalla, an EOD technician who has been through some absolutely crazy shit in his career, and we're here today to talk about that. Joe, how are you doing, man?
Good, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. I know, we got introduced at the EOD Memorial back in May, and someone was like, hey, you need to talk to this guy. And so, we sat down there and shared some stories, and you were like, I remember you saying nothing I've done is that impressive. And then you started telling me your stories from the EOD community, and I was like, holy shit, wild. But before we get ahead of ourselves, you graduated EOD school in 2007, correct?
Right. Yep. 2007.
All right. And then you headed out to Fort Bliss, and you deployed out there. So you were an EOD tech your entire time in the Army, correct?
Right. I came in as EOD.
All right. Yeah, that's the right way to do it. I did not, and I regret that. Right. What made you want to join the Army and go EOD to start with?
I grew up in Iowa, and I was pretty poor, so I got accepted to go to Iowa State for pre-engineering. I wanted to be an engineer and realized pretty quick that I couldn't afford it, and talked to the Army recruiters and took the ASVAB, and like every other EOD guy, scored super high. And they're like, man, you can do any job you want. And they're like, if you want to be an engineer, you should check out this combat engineer job, which, turns out has nothing to do with engineering. And I looked at that, and then I looked at EOD, and I think it was like the bonus for EOD was like 40,000, and the bonus for combat engineer was like 10. And like being an 18-year-old poor kid from Iowa, I was like, that 40,000 sounds pretty fucking cool. So I was like, I'll do that EOD job. And they're like, oh yeah, you do chemical and nuclear stuff and all sorts of crazy. Like, oh yeah, you got to be smart to do that too. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'll do that job. And they show the same video they show everybody. And then I left pretty soon after that to basic training. And get to basic. I was in Fort Jackson in August.
That's hot.
Had my suit test, and the guys had just gotten back from Iraq, so it was like only a handful of guys at the shop, or Iraq or Afghanistan. I think Iraq. And they're all bitter and whatever. I can't even remember any of their names, but the suit test, I remember like their volleyball court had been overgrown with weeds, so we're in chemical mop gear, and the big part of our suit test was cleaning up their volleyball court.
Did you have trouble when you got to school?
To EOD school?
Yeah.
I got to Redstone, and I failed out of recon at Redstone, and I rolled, and the instructors really liked me, which I didn't really know that. Actually, I saw Aaron Mumper down at the memorial this year, and he's like, I remember you as a student at Redstone. He's like, and you failed, and we all liked you. So, so I got back, and I passed that and went down to Eglin, and there was like a 2-month wait to get into class. But I was sitting in the auditorium one day, and all the people that I had started Redstone with were starting class, and there was a spot in that class, and I was just in the right place at the right time, and they're like, hey, you want to start school tomorrow? I'm like, yeah. All right. So kind of jumped at people in line, start school, and I got to TMDs, and I failed I can't remember which one was first, the rocket wrench or the 50 cal. I failed both of them, and they're like the 50 cal, my calipers ended up were wrong, So I was using my calipers and they were measuring different than the instructor's calipers. So I set my 50 cal up and then my measurement was off and I'm like, what the fuck? So I do it again at my retest and I set it up again and it's off and my instructor, he yells to the Navy chief. He's like, "Hey chief, come look at this 50 cal and tell me if you think it's all right." And the chief looks down at it and kicks it. And he's like, "Yeah, it looks good to me." And I thought I failed again, but they're like, "All right, you're good to go." I'm like, "Oh shit, all right." And then I get to 50 to the rocket wrench, and I put my rocket wrench on, and I'm doing everything, and then you have to put the bungee cord on. And I go to do that, and my instructor's like, "Yeah, don't bother, you already failed." And it was April. I remember it was April Fool's Day, and I thought he was fucking with me, and I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, whatever." So I keep continuing, and he's like, "Are you stupid?" He's like, "I already told you to fucking stop. You failed." And I literally thought he was joking with me all the way until he wrote like the counseling statement. And then I
I said
got
you
back,
failed.
yeah, and I was like, man, I need to. I was like, I don't know. And then you find out, I'm like, oh, if you fail out of school, they're gonna send you to whatever job they want to
Yeah.
send you to. And oh, by the way, you're not gonna get that bonus.
Yeah.
And so I'm finding out all these things, and I'm like, man, I need to fucking figure some shit out. And I passed that rocket wrench test, and then I didn't fail another. Kind of the story you hear a lot, people or like, yeah, I didn't fail another test the rest of the school, and went
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of the same way, right? Like I tapped every single test through ground. Never double tapped, but like every single test I tapped. As a matter of fact, so like you were talking about TMD's tools and methods division, the percussion actuated neutralizer, right? The pan. Like it
Right.
was we were testing during a storm, and so like we're underneath the awning, right? And I have my laser on it, and like right when I'm getting ready to take the laser off of it, because you have to take the laser off of it, if you don't, you fail. Like there's this like huge like crack of thunder, and it jarred me, right? And so like I stopped what I was doing, I walked back, I'm like, I'm ready to fire. And the instructor's like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, 100%." He's like, "Are you really sure?" I'm like, "Yeah, dude, like let's fire this shit." And he's like, "Okay, cool. It fires. You failed. You didn't take the laser off." And I like looked back down and saw it. And like I failed every single test through ground to the point where it was like, I'm not going to be an EOD tech. Like I'm just
Yeah.
I just don't get this shit, right? And what it turns out was I think I was overly serious going through school. And I had this moment where I was like, if like I'm in Florida, if I don't enjoy Florida a little bit, I'm gonna get reclassed. And I've been in Florida for like 6 months and I haven't done anything fun. So like I just started going to the beach. And it turns out as soon as I like let loose a little bit, I didn't fail another test in school. I mean, like I went through air division, didn't fail anything. And
Right.
so it was just a mental block, I guess I had.
Well,
And so it
well,
seems like it's pretty
they try
common.
to beat in. They try to beat into your head that you can't go out and have fun, or you're going to get a DUI, or you're going to get arrested, or kicked out of school for an alcohol-related offense, or whatever. And granted, there's probably several things that I could have gotten kicked out of EOD school for that I did in Florida that fortunately, but that's half of EOD probably. Like most of us
Yeah.
that made it through school probably could have got kicked out for something.
Yeah, I think most people have that story. And by the way, I'm down here at EOD school again, right? And we tell the students the same stuff. Like, hey man, focus on school, and you're here for a crab and to get a badge on your chest, and everything else is secondary. So I guess, like it perpetuates through generation to generation. But I mean, yeah, it is what it is. So you graduate EOD school, you go to Fort Bliss, correct?
Right. So I think I was like 20 years old, graduated EOD school, go to Fort Bliss, had an awesome unit. It was still they started staffing us as a legacy or as a modular unit with team members. So we got a bunch of extra team members, but we never got the sevens or extra officers. So we deployed as one of the last companies to deploy as legacy 22-man unit, and but it was like the Hunger Games of team members because they had all these competitions and stuff to see which team members were going to deploy with the unit because we didn't have the slots. And back then everybody wants to deploy, so we're
Right.
like stabbing each other to go deploy. So we deployed to Afghanistan, Jalalabad, and I think we got there just a year after I graduated. So must have been the fall of '08. Uh, I think I turned 21 probably the week before we deployed, and so which was good. I actually got to celebrate. Uh,
Yeah.
but we get over there, and it was kind of, everyone, like, we weren't not taking it serious, but like, we didn't really know what we were getting into. My team leader graduated EOD school after me. Uh, so he was one of the guys that graduated EOD school as an E5 and got auto promoted to E6. So he kind of showed up to the unit as an E6, and they had to make him a team leader type deal, which is where you talk about coming in as an EOD baby versus a prior MOS. Like, I think there's good sides to both.
Right.
Your prior MOS, you have that military experience. If you're an EOD baby, you're kind of forced to gain experience before you can, move to the next level. So we had a team. It was me and him and another guy, and he graduated. So me and him, like, he really valued my opinion, and we worked together a lot, which was great. He wasn't an asshole or a problem, and we had a good deployment. You know, we let's see. Okay, yeah. So that's my team leader went on leave on that deployment, and we had I had a replacement team leader, and we were out. Well, we had, like, kind of hit home on that deployment was we we started doing a lot of post blast. Like, this is when they were doing like going from Humvees to MREPs. So
Right.
people were still driving around Humvees, even though they were getting MREPs. They were choosing because they're saying that they thought they could not take the MREPs on these roads that we're taking Jervs or four wheel Cougar on. And I'm like, hey, if our truck can make it, your truck can make it, guys. But so it kind of got real for me on that deployment because we saw a lot. We did some post blasts, and people, you saw a little bit of death there, a V bit in the market in Jalalabad, a lot of civilian casualties, and then so we fast forward a little bit. My team leader goes on leave. We get a replacement team leader, and we're out on an ID call, and he gets sick, like, just, I don't heat exhaustion,
Yeah.
not hurt or anything, and we like it never even crossed my mind that, like, he just looked at me, and he's like, and he hadn't been deployed before, and he's like, well, what do we do? And I'm like, I guess I'll do it. And I was a specialist, so I get in the bomb suit and go down, and it was our robot had gotten stuck in a creek. The other team member drove it. It got stuck in a creek. So I put the bomb suit on, and here I am on my first deployment as a specialist doing that long walk by
Yeah.
myself down to this IED. And I'm like, man, this is pretty fucking cool. Uh,
Yeah.
and I get down there, I take care of it, and we, blow it up, and everything is recover the evidence and blow it up and blah, blah, blah. And we get back and we write up the storyboard, and then I'm getting, like, phone calls from battalion, and I'm like thinking that I'm going to be in trouble. They're like, well, how close did you get to the IED? And I'm like, well, I mean, I disarmed it. Like, what do you mean? I was right there. Like, they're like 3 feet away, 5 feet away, and I'm like, I didn't measure how long are my arms? Like, what?
Like zero feet away.
Yeah, yeah. And it was, I guess, because they were writing an award, so I got an impact award for that. And then my unit put me in. I went to the promotion board, and my unit put me in for the points were kind of high at that point for
Yeah.
EOD, and young guys, like, I didn't really have a chance to get a lot of points because I got to my unit, we trained for deployment, and we deployed. So, like, you could max out PT and max out your board, and you're still short. However, the old
Right.
point system worked, so long ago. And so they put me in for the battlefield promotion. So I actually got selected for the battlefield promotion to E5 uh, the same month that I made points. So, like, I got 2 sets of promotion orders, which is cool because it's kind of cool to get the battlefield promotion, I guess. But
Yeah, that's the one I would tell people about.
yeah, And then they started team leader certifying me on that deployment. Our unit actually got replaced by a modular company in the middle of our deployment, and we got sent down to Ghazni, and well, we got sent everywhere. So we had teams go to Airborne, to Ghazni, to all over wherever they needed teams. My team got sent to Ghazni, and me and another guy that were getting team leader, and I got sent up. Well, before that, I guess I got sent to work as a team member for another team member went on leave, and I got sent to work with the Duke Vega. I don't know if you know Duke, but he's like an EOD genius, and he started team leader certifying me, and so by the time we got down to Ghazni, I was pretty much done with all these team leader certs, and so the last couple months of the deployment, my first sergeant would just run as a team member with me and another guy who were finished our team leader certs, and we'd take turns running as a team leader.
It's
So
yeah, it's awesome, man. I mean, like I remember you're talking about doing the long walk for the first time as a specialist, which is like, for people that are listening who don't really understand EOD, like that's unheard of. Really we make our people get fully certified as team leaders before we allow them to put on the bomb suit and go down range and work on IEDs. And really like it's a safety thing across the board. But like I remember the first ID that I ran as a team leader, and like I had full circuit disruption. Like I was done working on the IED before I think really it clicked in my head that it was real.
yeah,
And I was like, oh, I got to blow this shit up like for real, for real. This isn't just training where I say, okay, and now I'm ready to move to disposal. Like I actually have to move to disposal. And I mean, it's a rush, dude.
right.
I loved every second of putting on the bomb suit and going down range. Did that kind of, I guess instill your passion for EOD and doing team leader stuff?
Yeah, so that's like I said, I'm 21 years old. I'm wearing, and then I get team leader certed on that deployment. I'm wearing the bomb suit. I'm running IEDs, and it makes you feel fucking awesome, and that adrenaline, and that built my love for EOD, and just wanting to learn more, and like everything. The cool thing about EOD is everything's always different. You could run
Yeah,
the same IED, the same type of IED, say a pressure plate, 10 different times in 10 different places, but it's a different place, it's a different scenario. The main charge might be different, there's always something, and you never know, like in secondaries, tertiaries, you don't know what you're running. You have to treat
right.
everything, the old complacency, if you run it the same way or you treat it the same way, that's how a lot of guys get hurt. So it's the rush was always that, something's different or can be different. And I kind of drove my, like, all I wanted to do was deploy again, to be a team leader again. And I was single, so I got back from Afghanistan, uh, and the White Sands unit had moved to Fort Bliss. So I was at 741st, and 734th moved from White Sands to Fort Bliss. And they were supposed to deploy to Afghanistan, and they needed team leaders. So I was going to go over there and waive my 1 year of stability or whatever to go deploy with them. And then it got changed to where they were deploying to Iraq, and they were only taking 5 NCOs, and it was to be part of like weapons intelligence teams, the WIT teams.
Yeah.
And my first sergeant at the time, Val Valencia, he came up to me and he's like, dude, don't waive your stability for that. He's like, that's stupid. He's like, you'll hate that. So he pulls me back to 741st, and I'm working with him again and doing response, and he's kind of mentoring me. And Featherman, of course, when Featherman was in charge of placing people, everyone has their Featherman stories. He always treated me pretty good. I can't ever complain. But I called him and I'm like, hey, I'm a young team leader. I want to deploy. Uh, what? He's like, well, there's this unit at Fort Polk that's getting ready to deploy, and they don't really have any team leaders, hardly at all. And he's like, if you go there, he's like, and if you reenlist there, I'll send you anywhere you want, and you won't have to stay for 2 years. And
Nice.
I was like, all right, yeah, I could get on board with that. So I go to the E6 board right at my 4 year mark, uh, and I get like my 4 year mark was like June 26th. I went to the June promotion board and I got promoted July 1st. So literally as soon as I could to E6. So I show up to Fort Polk as a young, like probably cocky 22-year-old E6, and so but I was the only team leader there that had deployed to Afghanistan. Uh, Besides one of the E7s who ended up not deploying with us, and so I was trying to tell the guys a little bit like it's different. If you've been to both places, it's different than Iraq, and I never went to Iraq, but uh, so I ended up I got in a motorcycle accident like I don't know 3 weeks before we deployed, and you could see like my ankle was fucked up, my knee was fucked up, and the surgeon at Fort Polk was like, "Well, you probably need knee surgery, but it's like you're not a professional athlete, so you'll be fine." And so I deployed wearing with an ankle brace, and I was still had to wrap my knee because it was still like an open wound because
Jesus.
it got rubbed down so bad. Uh, and so, but I think I kind of got off to a bad start with my command because I'm young. I get in a motorcycle accident Jesus. I showed up at the end of August and we were deploying in November, so I didn't have any time to train with my team. And I got really lucky. They gave me two awesome team members, Chris Stark and Devin Colvin. And so we deployed to Afghanistan, I think the day after Thanksgiving that year. And we go to Shank. It's pretty quiet. You hear about Shank as people call it Rocket City, a lot of
Yeah.
incoming. Uh, Pretty good amount of IED work, but we got there in the winter, and Afghanistan has the fighting seasons where in the wintertime they kind of tuck away and don't do much. So we weren't doing a ton. The only team in our company at that time, I think, that was doing a ton was Chauncey Mays down at Tangi in Wardak there in the Tangi Valley, and he had a team member and he was running just a ton of IEDs, and he had a team member get fragged by a DFC in a leg, and so we had to send a replacement, and I offered Stark because I thought Stark was the best team member in our company, or one of the best. I mean, he was pretty awesome dude, in shape, smart, blind as a bat. We had a funny Stark story. Well, I have two funny Stark stories. One time the funny thing is, it seems like how many times have you been in a firefight that EOD started? Like we're getting shot at, and we're with infantry guys, and nobody's shooting back. And I'm like, how come nobody's shooting back? Like, I tell my guy, I'm like, shoot back. Like, we're getting shot at from that building over there. It's not even his sector of fire. So he rotates his gun a full 180 to shoot back. And as soon as we shoot back, the rest of the convoy starts shooting back like they were waiting. And I'm
Waiting
like,
for someone to say
why are the
start.
like, why are the EOD guys starting the firefight? This makes no sense. But I look over and I just see tracers and bullets are hitting the dirt like 50 yards next to our truck. And I'm like, what are you doing, Stark? And he's like, I don't know. I forgot my glasses. And so he couldn't see, which is why he wasn't driving. So he
Yeah,
was just shooting at nothing.
he was
Yeah.
right ahead of me in school. I think he was. Yeah, I was with him in Redstone. He's a couple classes ahead. Then I got med held. So I think he graduated a couple months ahead of me. But we traveled in some of the same circles with the same friends. Um, yeah, good dude, man. So you wind up sending him down to Chauncey, correct?
Right. And then it was probably a week or two later. Uh, they had one close call where they were working on an IED that partially detonated, and the det cord went off, and it didn't set off the main charge. And a couple of them got hurt. Or not hurt, but just concussed, and uh, I saw Chauncey. I went on a flyaway and I ran. We ended up finding a booby-trapped cache in a house, and we blew up this house in the Tangi Valley, and we got shot at the whole way back. And so we get back. We flew in and then we walked to the cop for extraction. So we flew in, ran that IED and a couple more. We go back, which it was a pretty fun mission actually, because I got to blow up a house, and uh, this cache was like we found it on the roof, and there was an access point from the bottom, like in a carport, but you could if that was where the booby trap was. So I dug from the roof to get to it, and then blew it up from there. And like I remember, like all the women in Choate, we evacuated everybody, and they're all crying, and I'm like, well, I don't know, I didn't put the ID in your house, like what do you want me to do about it? And
Right.
we sent most of the security element forward so that when we blew up the house, we were going to hurry back, and we were going to bound over these mountains uh, instead of taking the road. So we were taking the hard way back to avoid IEDs, which worked, but we were just open to fire almost the whole way back. So every time we'd get up a mountain and have to go down, uh, we'd get shot at. And we had one guy get shot in the shoulder, I think. And I remember when we first got shot at, the medic for this infantry company laid down and started crying. Like, I was like, fuck, the medic should not be like, that's the last thing you want to see from a medic. I'm like, are you all right? Did you get hit? He's like, no, we're getting shot at. I'm like, yeah, no shit, bud. Like,
Yeah, we gotta keep moving, man, or we're gonna get shot for
yeah,
real.
yeah. So we get back to the cop, and I was exhausted, but I saw Chauncey, and this was 2 days before him and Stark got killed. I saw him, and I was like, hey man, what's going on? And he's like, I've kind of I've figured things out here. I'm not like I'm changing things up. I'm gonna start blowing the IDs up in place more, and a lot of just we had a good talk, and I flew back to Shank, and I remember when he got killed, I was uh, I was on my computer and that was when we had Skype. Everyone used Skype, and his other team member wasn't on the mission with them, so they were doing laundry, and the raid camera caught a guy in placing an ID, and they fired mortars at him, and the guy ran off. Uh, so they're like, "Well, you stay back and watch the laundry, and we'll go run the incident. It should be quick, you know."
Yeah.
And so this guy, his name's Jason Buck. He calls me on Skype, and "Hey
I know
man,"
Buck.
he's like, "Hey man, Mays got killed and Stark is wounded." And I'm like, "Oh, well, are you fucking kidding me right now?" I'm like, hang up the Skype, and I'll call you back on Zipper, which is a secure line, because that's not a conversation we should be having on Skype. And
Right.
so we had just gotten a new compound at Shankman. Our unit talk or tactical operations center was across the base still, so we had to drive like 20 minutes. And I remember now it's like a snowstorm, and I took a Humvee and I'm driving across the base like 40 miles an hour, and I run into the talk thinking like they're going to be scrambling because they already knew. I run into the talk and nobody knows what happened. So our commander's in there and our operations people are in there, and everybody, like, no one had known what happened yet. So I went into the commander's office and I'm like, hey man, I got to tell you something. And I
Yeah.
told him, well, first I called Buck on the line and I'm like, hey, is what you told me, does that still apply? And he's like, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So I went and talked to the commander. He comes out and I let him brief the room. Our first sergeant was on leave uh, when it happened, so he kind of briefs the room, and we, but for me, I like going in there was just a shock. I'm like, holy shit, these people, they don't know what happened yet. Uh,
Yeah.
and so my whole thought process that time was, I need to go to uh, the aid station because uh, Shank had a level 1 triage, so that's where they'd medevac from. And I'm like, Stark, all I had heard at that point was he was critical. So I'm like, he's critical. I need to go to the aid station and be there when he lands. Like I need to be there when he lands. And then it wasn't much longer. We got a call that he didn't. They couldn't. They kept him alive for a good amount of time, but there was a snowstorm, uh, and the helicopter couldn't lift off. So
Yeah.
they couldn't get the medevac. So I think when they went to move him, they made the decision to move him, and they lost their sailing lock. Is what I heard. And then, but anyways, the medevac. They couldn't get a medevac, which ended up changing some of the rules in that region at that time because the medevac was green when they went out on the mission, but it was red at Shank. So when they went out on the mission, they were judging based on their weather, and so they yeah. I saw the
Yeah.
medevac commander, the battalion commander, lieutenant colonel, who was also a pilot, and he's like, "Yeah, my pilots told me they couldn't fly because of the weather," and he's like, "I went out and got in a helicopter by myself, and I was gonna go, fly solo and break all the." He's like, and I couldn't get lift, and I don't know
Yeah.
a lot about flying. I'm not a pilot, but I was like, yeah, well, it sucked. Uh, we had a team that went there to do the post blast, and then I got sent down there uh, to replace or to cover down on that area. So,
Yeah.
um,
That was a bad time in Afghanistan. So we were there the same time when Chris and Chauncey got hit. You know. So you go down there. You wound up getting hurt on that deployment, correct, and going back to the States.
I so yeah. Do you want to hear anything about the
Yeah.
ID
No.
that
Yeah. I
Mays
mean,
and
if
Stark or
if you're willing to share and if it's open source, then yeah.
yeah. So and a lot of it's kind of opinion form because the post blast didn't really reveal too much, but they caught a guy in placing an IED, shot mortars at him. The guy ran away, and they went back. They went out and they found the wire going to a full jug. Um, and I think that in their mind that they thought it was just a partial emplacement. But there was they found it ended up being so. I think what happened, and you watch the camera video and you kind of see they go back down. Both of them go back down to kind of clean up the scene. I think, which isn't uncommon as an EOD team leader. When you clear things and you
Right.
think it's safe, you bring your team member down to, all right, let's get things cleaned up and get out of here.
Right.
Uh, and he had his metal detector and got a hit and probed something, and that was kind of it. So I think he saw something and probed it, like hit it with the metal detector and probed it, and they found a battery pack with a piece of like sheet metal on it. So I think there was some sort of anti-probe. Uh, so that device was just come along to get him there, but it was almost one of those scenarios that when you play out in your head and you're like, man, would I have done anything different? And I don't like. You talk to a lot of EOD techs, and with the research, and Tangy was all dismounted, so you only walked. So you only had what you can carry, and most of the time we went out at night because most of the IEDs were command wire.
Yeah.
So uh, a lot of me and most people I talk to are like, man, I can't think of anything that I would have done different in that scenario. So kind of got into my head a little bit. Now I'm going down there to cover down. So I remember like my first week at Tangy. So it was a company minus. So there were two platoons. One platoon was on guard duty and one platoon was on missions, and they would go out every night. And Mays, I think, was exhausted throughout his time there because you run so many IEDs. So we'd go out, like if you try to take a night off, I was going out so one platoon's going out and they're sending a squad out at a time, but you have one EOD team, so EOD's going out with every
Right.
squad. So you're going out every night and running multiple IEDs, and then you're coming back and doing evidence and reports. And the reports got to the point, this diagrams and like every facet of the report that you had to do, where they would take just so long. Uh,
Yeah.
I actually, like, if it wasn't anything like game changing, I was just taking multiple IEDs and putting them in one report, or like the evidence for multiple IEDs and just putting them in one. Because like I came back after running like 10 IEDs one night, and it was a mixture between command wire that went to the road for an IED, or command wire that went to a booby trap DFC that was in a berm or somewhere. So we had the goldies. You trace the command wire, and you'd either find the IED or take you to the road and find the IED there. Well, I remember calling battalion and I'm like, can I lump these into one storyboard? The locations are pretty close, and they're like, no, you have to do separate storyboards for all of them. And I'm like, there's no way. I can't like you so every night. Like the first night I tried to take a night off, the scouts, we had a scout team, and they're like, yeah, if if you guys find an IED, we'll take them out. It was like a 4-man scout team. And sure enough, like right away, they're like, oh, found an IED. So at that point, we're just like, yeah, no nights off. So these
Yeah.
guys would get a break every week. They'd go on guard duty, and we were just going out every night. And I didn't really think about this till after my time there, but like also on the mission, everyone was taking a knee while I was working. As soon as I would get done with the IED, we'd get up and start moving again. So I would, the team leader, you're never taking a break, constantly
Yeah.
moving, and it's
It's one
all
of those things
dismounted.
that, I'm trying to explain to people, that time frame, when, I think I graduated school in 2010 and I deployed 3 weeks later. But like when I went to EOD school, there was 400 students on deck. When I graduated EOD school, there was over 1,000 students on deck because they were trying to plus up the numbers within the community. And so, like, a lot of times when I have conversations with people, like, oh yeah, we had to wait on EOD for 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, whatever the case may be. Like people just don't understand that we were running people ragged. I mean, people were going from mission to mission to mission, and literally exactly what you just said. We were doing the same thing in RC East, where there was two infantry platoons on our COP. One would be on force protection, so they'd be doing guard towers, and the other would go out. And there was always someone going out. So we were going out every single day, all day. You come back, the other platoon is on a rest cycle, but you're not, right? Because you have to keep working because you're the only EOD team in the battle space. And so it's like exhaustion was a huge thing. And we had a lot of techs get hurt or killed, I think, probably because of exhaustion, right? Not because they weren't good techs or they didn't know what they were doing. It's just when you run IEDs for 12 hours a day every day, and then everything that you're talking about, the reports on the same side, those reports were not little reports. I mean, and so for people that are listening that don't understand, it's like you had to write everything that you did. You had to put photos in, and this is before the days of we were using handheld cameras, right? That were issued to you. So you have to. There's all the little things that people don't think about, right? It's like you got to photograph the evidence, and then you got to take the photos from the
You can't
camera and put them
can't
on the
plug your
computer.
camera into the computer. You have to burn them
Right.
to a
So
CD on a separate
exactly
camera,
right.
and
So like you have to take your photos, then you have to upload them to a certain computer that burns a disk. Then you take that disk and you put it onto the other computer network, so you couldn't plug your camera into it. You got to package up all of your evidence, right? You have to label all of your evidence.
meticulously, yeah, chain of custody
Correct.
and all.
Chain of
Yeah,
custody. And then on top of that, you have to do your storyboard. And in your storyboard, you have to have all your photos. You have to have directional photos, photos of the device, photos of where you were. And then when you're done with that, you have to build a PowerPoint slide that has like a diagram of everything. So like your little north seeking arrow, where your truck was parked, where the IED was, where security was, the path you took, what terrain features were in the area. And so your storyboard winds up being like 30 slides of just like everything. And so when you're talking about you run 10 IEDs in a night and you have to write 10 storyboards, you're really talking about 6 hours of work, right? On top of the
Right.
12 hours you just spent working.
And it used to be like on my first deployment at the very beginning, they had different criterias for storyboards, and it was before like the AT Solutions program that we used to create the storyboards. We were just doing them on a PowerPoint template.
Yeah.
But we had like a simple storyboard. We just called it a 5 line, and it was the 5 Ws and one picture and a short synopsis. So like if it wasn't anything major, you would do this what we called a 5 line, like for a UXO or something, and you could be done in 10 minutes. And it had all the pertinent information. Well, once they went to that new like reporting system, it was just a pain in the ass.
Yeah, and then
Because
you had
every
storyboards. Yeah, you had storyboards that were like red, yellow, green. So if it was green, you had like 24 hours to do it. But if it was like yellow or red, you had like no time at all from the time you returned
Yeah,
to get it up to battalion and then, eventually up to paladin. And so it's like, yeah, I mean, because we were doing the same thing, right? I mean, it's exhausting. So people think like, oh, EOD runs in an IED, and then they're back at the house doing nothing. It's like, no, we're packaging, evidence. And then you got to get that evidence to the FARP, to the flight line, so they can ship it out, right? So, like, you have multiple
right.
lines of effort on a 3-person team where people are like photographing and packaging and writing storyboards. And then, oh, by the way, if you
Charging
get
charging batteries, taking care of
yeah,
equipment, making sure
yeah,
your truck is ready to go,
refit
cleaning,
refit
refit.
explosives and ammo, yeah.
Right.
And then if you get a phone call for an IED anywhere in that timeline, everything stops. You go run the next IED, and now you start like stacking all the paperwork and administrative data that you have to do after the fact. And it was, yeah, man. I mean, exhaustion was all that to say, like, exhaustion was huge. We didn't have enough people, we didn't have enough techs, and then you know, I'm fine with the jokes now, but it used to really bug me when people are like, "Oh, EOD takes forever to get out here." It's like, dude, we're working and we're like busting our
Yeah.
ass to support you guys. Um, yeah, man. I mean, that was 10,
On
11 was a hell of a
so
time.
on my first deployment, I had an E7 in our unit who had been to Picatinny before, and he told me all about how awesome it was and what they get to do. And so at that point, I reenlisted. Featherman said as soon as I got back from Afghanistan, I could go to Picatinny. So I'm spending almost no time at Fort Polk, and so I'm supposed to go to Picatinny when I get back. So now I'm at Tangi, and we're closing down the base. They decide for some reason to close down that base, and so now they're doing convoys down this road that for a long time has been a black road that Route Georgia, nobody can go down it. So they're doing convoys, and our job, we went. So they had an OP at the top of a mountain, and Tangi was to the south, either the south or my directions are probably messed up, but either way. So to the south of the OP, and then on the north of the OP, we set up a little concertina wire like uh, patrol base, and we were living there for about 10 days, and we would just go out every night from there and clear the road and the walkway uh, for the RCPs that were coming in with equipment to take stuff from the base. So we were just doing the same thing every night, and we were running tens of and all these IDs, and then we'd come back and we'd sleep on rocks. And it'd be. I remember going to bed. We'd get back like 4 in the morning, and you go to bed like shivering in your sleeping bag, and you wake up like sweating your nuts off because you're up in the mountains, and all of a sudden it gets hot, and then you'd sit around all day. Like we'd get shot at, and I remember the first time we were at that OP, my team member, like we got shot at, and there's like, it's funny because we have one position to return fire basically. Otherwise, we're covered by HESCO barriers, and so like you're behind the HESCO barrier, you're pretty safe, and the fire wasn't effective. But all the like young infantry guys and my team members were like, "Can we go shoot back? Can we go shoot back?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't care." Like, and I just laid down, took a nap. I'm like, "I'm gonna be over here sleeping." So we were doing that, and we'd only go out at night because, like I said, all the IEDs were command wire, and a lot of them had booby traps. And any time historically that unit had gone out during the daytime, they got fucked up. Uh,
Yeah.
People got killed, people got wounded, and so it made sense. So it was the last clearance that we had to do for the last convoy, and for some reason the battalion commander got in a hurry, and he's like, "We're coming in during the day." Like, we're coming in at, it was like 1600, and it got dark at like 1800, and I'm like, "Okay, why don't you wait?" And they're like, "No, we're coming in. You guys need to go clear. You need to go do your clearance at." And I'm like, "No, I'm not gonna go till it gets dark." And they called my bluff, and they're like, "Well, the infantry guys know how to run a metal detector. We'll send them out, you know." And I was like, "All right, touche, you got me. I'll go." Like, yeah, I'm not gonna, And there was so I remember actually on this deployment or on this mission, uh, my team member, Devin, he was behind me. So we would run. We had an infantry guy that would take the lead, and he had a Goldie. And then he had two guys on a V behind him, and then I was behind him with my two team members on a V behind me. And I remember turning around to my team members at one point and being like, "Hey, back up a little bit, like it's daytime. I got a bad feeling." And like Colvin just exploded. He's like, "We've been out here fucking, every night, every day, same shit, same IEDs." He's like, and I was like, "Hey, well, when you're the boss, you can decide where to put your fucking team members." And so they back up a little bit, and we came to a point where we had found an IED almost every day. Uh, and it was where the river kind of meets the road. So the route we were clearing had a river next to it, and we never crossed the river, hardly ever. One time, we crossed the river and went out, and I found so many wires. I thought my detector was broken, like it was just like whir, whir, whir. And I look up, and there's wires in the trees and wires on the ground, and we ran them all, and they all went to an outhouse. And I go inside this, and it was an Afghan shit house, and I sent an Afghan police officer in there to clear it first because I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not going in that shit house. I'm not dying
Yeah.
in a shit house." So I go into the shit house, and they had a window, and you could see the whole valley, uh, this whole road, and they probably had, I would say, 40 to 60 sets of wires in there, and they had labels, like written labels on them. So it was like a firing station, and it was the craziest shit I've ever seen. Like, I was like, "Oh my God, this is where they do it." Like,
Yeah.
and however, I was like, Jesus. Uh, so we took care. A lot of the ID wires had already been cut or were old. So like, I didn't like, you didn't know what was new, what was old, but we ended up blowing up that house or that shit house and eliminating what we could from that. But that was just a little side story of how crazy that area was at that time, and like, I'm sure there are other places in Afghanistan like that, but it was just like, I remember finding that and looking in there, and I'm like, "Man, these guys are smarter than I think or than I
Yeah.
thought." Like, holy shit. Not just are they placing pretty elaborate booby traps, but they're also like, they have a system. Like, they're organized. They're marking targets and have them labeled on a wall like a firing board.
Yeah, they were a smart fighting force, man. I think, for people that never went to Afghanistan, a lot of people think that like we were fighting an unsophisticated like adversary. Like, yeah, they didn't have body armor and uniforms, and they were smart as shit. I'll give them that, man. The people that we fought were good. They just, they didn't wear uniforms and they didn't have body armor and they didn't have, but like they had tactics and they had a
Yeah.
way of conducting business. They were very, very effective at what they did. And I think that's one of the things that like, people that didn't deploy or people that didn't, weren't in the military at the time, like constantly think that like we were fighting a ragtag bunch of, insurgents. Like that's not really the case. Like we were fighting people that have been fighting their parents and their grandparents fought, the Soviets, right? Like they knew what they were doing. And they were very, very effective in the way that they did it with the IED emplacement, with the complex ambushes. I mean, I remember in 2011 we got caught in like an L-shaped ambush that was just like textbook, and it was
Yeah.
gnarly. It was a firefight for, like something out of a movie. And so like there's that whole concept. We talk about going to this outhouse and seeing all the wires going and everything being labeled. Like, yeah, um, they were good at what they did, man. How did I
So we
know?
were on this we were on this mission, and that river I was telling you about, it's pretty wide and it's has a swift current. I know, like the year before I was there, some MPs had actually had a guy drowned trying to cross it, and so we were just clearing in between the river and the road, and there comes to a spillway where the river meets the road, and it's a natural choke point. If you're walking,
Yeah,
like you have to cross right there, and so the plan all along at that point every night, the plan was for me to take the lead with the detector, and so I get a hit and find a wire. This wire ended up going. I'm about 5 feet from the choke point, maybe 5 to 7 feet, and this wire was going to the road. And so I'm kind of working on it, and I remember I had a J knife and a rope, so I just clip a J knife, which I guess if people don't know what that is, it's just a hook with a blade on it, and you put it on the wire and then remotely cut the wire.
yeah, like a seatbelt
Uh,
cutter.
right. So I I put that on, or I was knelt down with the crown of my helmet facing forward, looking at my vest, and almost like crouched over, like in a fetal position, because you can imagine like trying to find something on your kit, and you have this helmet on, and so you're looking down, and your face is straight down. My helmet's forward, and I'm on a kneel and crunched over, so I'm almost like in a ball reaching for this thing, and that's when an IED went off in front of me, and I think the guy that set it off probably thought I was working on that IED, and he saw me reaching for my tool and decided to blow it up when in reality I was working on the IED that was in front of that one uh, going to the road. So he sets that IED off, and blasts are funny. Most of the time you usually end up near the blast with the positive and negative pressure, and I got blown back uh, so far, like 20 feet. The guy behind me, the security guy, said I did flips in the air, and I landed on my back. And when I woke up, you know, all I saw was a cloud of dust in front of me, and I remember so the last thing I remember was looking forward, trying to find my tool, and then I wake up and my team members, I see a cloud of dust, and I hear my team members like crying out my name. They had run up to the blast site, and they're in front of me at this point, and I'm like, hey, fucking retards, I'm back here. like, I get on the radio and I call up and I'm like, hey, and adrenaline at this point is running me. I'm like,
Yeah,
hey, it's EOD. What happened? Who got hit? And they're like, EOD team leader. And I'm like, yeah. What the fuck? What's going on? They're like, you got blown up. And I'm like, oh shit. So like I start doing the hand checks of like, am I bleeding? And I don't have any major, like, I'm not missing any limbs or anything. Uh, and I'm like, oh, holy shit. So I've got some minor stuff going on, and one of my ears, well, both my ears are bleeding, and So I start, I'm like, all right, I get my team back. I go up, I do a post blast, which is funny, do my own post blast, snap some pictures, get the evidence, like find one of my team members found my rifle like pretty far away. And then, so we gather everything back. And at this time, I'm angry. Like, I just remember being mad, like, fucking stupid fuckers. Like, we shouldn't even fucking be out here. Like, the whole time I'm doing this post blast, I'm just screaming, like, fucking motherfuck, fuck, everybody. And then at this point, it's starting to get dark. And we see we end up getting in a firefight. And now I'm throwing up and I can't
Yeah.
stand up. And the whole effect of the concussion has hit me. Like I can't tell you my last four. Like I can't, like the medic is like, holy shit, like something's wrong with this guy. We need to medevac him, and they call in for medevac, and it gets denied because of the firefight that we're in. And they
Yeah.
tell us to walk back to that little OP that we set up. So now it's dark, getting dark, and people are switching to nods, and we have the shittiest nods possible with the old 14s or single tube, no depth perception, and all these fields are terraced farms. So we're walking back, and basically I'm getting carried by two guys because every time I'd like take a step and the elevation would change, I would just like tumble. Uh, and so we get to the OP, and they're like, okay, we need a medevac to the OP. And then they deny the medevac again. And they're like, no, you need to get them back to the cop. Well, the only way to get to the cop was to go up this mountain over where the OP is on the top of the mountain and then back down the other side. And at night, and like 2 days before, it's dangerous during the daytime. Like it's a pretty steep mountain and it's a lot of
Yeah.
shale and rock. Like there was an infantry guy who fell and pretty much ate the butt of his rifle and knocked all his teeth out like 2 days before at night and had to get medevac. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not walking over that mountain right now. And I had a sat phone, and I called my commander, and all they had heard was that I got blown up, so they're like, their wheels are spinning thinking that I'm like, nah, it's not that bad. Uh, and so we end up we end up on this route that it has black and dangerous with IEDs, but we had just cleared it, so I feel pretty good. And they put us, just me and my team, and this had to have been the dumbest thing I've ever done. But me and my team got into a Ford Ranger with the Afghan army guys, and they drove us down the road. The road curved around the mountain and came back to the actual cop. But this is what the battalion told us to do. Hey, the ANA is going to take you back. So the ANA drove us just with their truck, me and my two guys and I'm still throwing up and like can't really figure out what's going on. And I just remember the ANA come like screaming up to the gate of the base, and I'm like, American, like don't shoot us, and we get in there, and then finally, uh, there's an aid station in there, and it's dark because we don't have power. The base is closing down, and he starts cleaning out my ears and stuff, and like blood just starts like coming out, and he's like, yeah, we need to get this guy to Shank, and so they send in a replacement EOD team, and my commander was like, yeah, just take your team members on the bird with you back to Shank. So we go back. I spent a couple days in the hospital. I remember like my buddy Travis Parker. He came to visit me in the hospital, and he told me later on, he's like, man, I thought you were going to be retarded forever. He's like, I went to visit you in the hospital, and you couldn't like. He's like, you just like couldn't talk or tell. Like he's like, you like nothing. Your brain wasn't working. And at this time, like concussions weren't really a big deal, but the ruptured eardrums and my back was pretty fucked up. And the doctor's like, well, we're gonna give you 2 weeks to see how you are. And so my company's the EOD company's like, oh, we'll just send them on R&R. You know, you get 2 weeks of R&R during the deployment.
Yeah.
So I get sent on R&R. So I go through, which is, you know, that fun process of going through Kuwait and getting back for R&R. So I literally go from getting blown up, having a severe concussion, some other shit going on. My back's all fucked up. Like, go enjoy your 2 weeks off the deployment. So that's what I get. I get home, and then, you know, kind of like all I wanted to do is get back to my team
Yeah.
and go run again. So I kind of put the injuries that I sustained on that, like on the back burner, and was like, all right. At the end of
It's
that R&R, I was like, I'm ready.
uh,
I'm ready to go. Like, you know, everyone's like, are you good? Are you sure you're gonna go back? And I'm like, yeah, I'm ready to go back. You know, and so I go back and
R&R
continue the
was such a
deployment.
mind fuck, dude, on those year long deployments where they gave you 2 weeks off. Because it's like, mine really messed me up because I set like a land speed record for getting back to the States. So, like, I was on a cop, made it back to Sharana in a couple hours, literally got to Sharon. They're like, hey, there's a flight leaving for Bath in an hour. Got on that, showed up to Bagram, and they're like, hey, there's a flight leaving for Kuwait in 2 hours. Got on that, got to Kuwait, and they're like, hey, there's a flight going to Atlanta in 35 minutes. And I got on that. And so, like, I was back in the States in like under a day. And like, I was still dirty from Afghanistan. Like, I still had like dirt caked all over me. And it was just like, I remember getting to the airport in Atlanta and my mind could not comprehend like colors and certain sounds. It was like, it was wild to me. But then
Yeah,
you spend 2 weeks on leave and you know that your teams are still out there running IEDs. And so like, it's not like really
yeah.
relaxing.
You see something on the news, and then you're like
Yeah.
messaging. You're getting on Facebook and trying to message all your buddies, like, hey, you know, is it you? It's what's going on? You know what? I saw this.
Yeah. And so
Yeah,
like it was not rest and relaxation. Then you're doing everything you can to get back, to your people.
and I had terrible. I had just gotten blown up. I always had terrible headaches. My ears are still fucked up. Like, I really was pretty miserable on my 2 weeks of R&R. And then when I got back, I got back with my tour. I got new Colvin. He'd gotten team leader certified. He was an E6 at this point, and my other team member went to a different team leader, and so I got a new team, and I went to Carwell, which was over in Wardak, and had a great time. Like, that was uh, that was a really cool base. It's one of the like few bases like we actually sat up on a hill. We could see most around. Like, we actually had a tactical advantage. The the work was great. Tons of BOD work. The mission, like the company, the infantry company that was there was awesome. The food was great. They had army cooks that were like actually gave a shit. Uh, and then so I was there for a couple months and having a great time. But I was real busy again. Like, it was like that deployment. The work followed me. Like, I'd be like, all right, you know, we'll send you here, and then it gets super busy. Uh, and we were running a lot of booby traps at Carwile too, aimed at us, the EOD guys. So we were in a lot of loop switches. I remember finding the first loop switch, and I didn't even really know what a loop switch was. I mean, we know what they are, like how they work, but you don't like think of you're gonna find one. And I remember like I pulled like the ID. It was a post blast, so a mortar went off on an A&A guy who pulled a wire, and I'm like, okay, the wire's probably connected to some sort of booby trap. So I go down there, remote pull everything, do all the UD stuff, and I get the wire, and I remember I'm looking at it, and I'm like, and it just clicks in my brain. I'm like, oh, it's a fucking loop switch, you know,
Yeah.
like just the wire waiting to get pulled.
Yeah.
So I guess to explain that would be like, there's a loop in the wire that's bare and a loop in another wire that's bare. So you have two bare contacts of a wire, and the way, if you think of a light switch, when you switch it on, so any IED has the three components: a switch, uh, a power source, and a charge. or an initiator. So the switch was just two bare pieces of wire that when they got pulled, the command wire got pulled tight, those bare loops would touch and connect the circuit. So I was like, oh, okay. Again, these guys are smart, like,
Yeah.
and then a lot of giant culvert IEDs. And I kind of had a cool thing going because, like, now at this time, it's on Highway 1, the main highway in Afghanistan. Now there's a policy. They're like, if you're going to blow up Highway 1, you have to get, like, a full bird colonel's approval. And you're out
Of
in the middle
course.
of an IED, and I'm like,
Yeah.
how the fuck? So the commander of our battalion, and I'm like, so we would blow up culverts, and they would just come in. They had construction crews that would come backfill them and just eliminate the culvert. Like, we're like, fuck it. If they're going to put IEDs in their culverts, we're not going to put a new culvert in. We'll just so. They wanted me to blow up the road. They're like, yeah, if it's in there, just blow it up. We'll come get rid of one. Uh, one easy place. And then they started doing where they'd go in the culvert to the middle of the culvert, and then they would tunnel through the side of it and put the main charge. So if you looked in the culvert, it would
You
look
couldn't see
clear,
it. Yeah.
and you couldn't see it. And I'm like, well, I'm not climbing, not climbing in there to to get it. So yeah, it was kind of always a game of cat and mouse. And I was busy, and my company, I think, got that, and they're like, all right, we're gonna send another team down there. So they send Mike Garcia and his team. Stacy was on his team. Uh, Stacy Klingon, great friend of mine, and they come to Carwell, and we're just living it up. Like, we have two teams, we get along great. The food is good, uh, and I'm running most of the missions. Mike has been there not too terribly long. He's a more senior EOD guy than me, but I felt responsibility to the area. Like, all right, I know the booby traps, I know the area. I'm trying to ease him into the area, and we get a call that there's three IEDs, and I just happen to be by the phone, so I go to take it. We go up to the talk, and they're like, well, here, we're just gonna wait till the morning, uh, and we will in the morning we'll send an RCP out, a route clearance team, and EOD, and you guys will clear all the IEDs. And I come back and I tell Mike about it, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna go, and I'm like, no, I'm gonna go. I already talked to him. And he's like, bullshit. He's like, you brought me here for a reason. He's like, you can't keep going on all the missions. And so me and Mike played rock, paper, scissors, and he won. So he went on the mission the next morning, and he ended up getting killed by one of those loop switches. Uh, and yeah, I didn't. That one hurt. I remember he, he. I just was thinking about his team, and my team member that I had at this time had been on Mike's team for the whole deployment until just recently. So my team member was really close to Mike, uh, and obviously he had his two team members with him. So Stacy did the post blast, and I was ready. I woke up to a phone call, and it was my platoon sergeant. He's like, "Hey, are you going out on that post blast?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Mike's out there." And they're like, "No, Mike's the one who got hit." And I'm like, "Oh shit." So I went running up to the cop talk, and they looked at me like they saw a ghost. They thought I was the one on the mission. Uh, so that's why they didn't send anyone to wake me up. Like, they didn't even realize that they had two EOD teams there.
Yeah.
So we, I'm like, all right. And when I woke up, I saw a convoy that looked like it was getting ready to leave. And so I was like, hey, if that fucking convoy leaves without me, I'm gonna kill some. Like, you're gonna be. Well, ended up, they ground evac'd his Mike's body, and Stacy did the post blast, did a great job, and so I didn't go out, and I was like, all right, I got to send these guys with Mike so the medevac landed to pick up Mike, and I had these guys pack. Before Stacy got back, I had packed a bag for both of those guys, and I'm like, hey, you guys I'm gonna have you escort them to Bath or wherever.
Yeah.
And so the medevac pilots were like, no, they can't do that. And I'm like, well, you're not leaving without them. So they take them with them, and Klingon actually got to escort Mike all the way back to the States, and which was kind of nice. But I remember after that, like when Mike got killed was the first time that I sat down and was like, this is a possibility, like, man, because before that I felt invincible, like king of the, I could go do anything. Even when I got blown up, I was like, yeah, I'm still here, I got some back pain and my ears hurt and I'm a little dumber, but I'm still going. Uh, and when he got killed, and I sent all my team members on that helicopter, I remember I was sitting on the front porch of our little hooch that we had, and I was cleaning all of Mike's sensitive items, and just like the infantry guys were having a barbecue because it was on 4th of July. And I was like, why the fuck are these guys barbecuing? Uh, and like, I don't know, it was a surreal time and a surreal moment, just the way it happened from the rock, paper, scissors to how I found out, you know, at first I felt guilty that I wasn't able to go do the post blast myself, and, and then to sitting there by myself after I'd sent everyone away. So now I'm alone. I'm the only EOD tech on the base, and I'm sitting there just cleaning his stuff. And then, they sent another team out, which was Colvin. Colvin was my team member at the beginning of deployment, so now we have two teams again. I get along great with Colvin. He is a great dude, smart, great EOD guy. Uh, and we're hanging out, and we usually would take turns on response. And so he was on response, and we got the call uh, that the helicopter had crashed in Tangi, and
That's
we were going to
extortion
go
1-7, right?
right. So I go up to the talk, and they had the live feed up, and you see the fire on the ground, and they're like, "All right, we're going in," and I'm like, "Are we flying in?" They're like, "No, we're driving. We're driving in." Again, we had just left Tangi, and that black road, the helicopter crashed. So I got blown up about a kilometer and a half from where Maze got killed, and the helicopter crashed about 700 meters from where I got blown up. Uh, and so there was an RCP unit without an EOD team that was traveling from like Ghazni to Bagram for some reason. Our normal RCP unit at Carwell was gone somewhere else. And so they're like, you're going to go with this RCP unit, and you're going to clear into down Route Georgia into Tangi and go to the crash site. And I start talking to this route clearance unit, and I'm like, all right, here's how we have to do it. You have to have a dismount team, that walks the roads with detectors. And they're like, we can't just drive with our Husky. And I'm like, if you don't clear for command wire on the roads, you're gonna get blown up. And I'm like, and also the command wire, 50% of them go to an IED, so you have to be careful. We ended up finding some IEDs. We caught a guy. They hemmed up a guy placing an IED, and we get to the crash site. And we were on the way to the crash site, and came over the radio. They're like, hey, just so everybody knows, there's 38 KIA. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, that's a lot of people for, fucking Chinook, like 38 KIA, Jesus. And it ended up with 31 Americans and 7 Afghans and a working dog. and there were two Navy EOD techs on that helicopter actually. And we get to the crash site, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna go in there, one of my team members, I'm like, yeah, you need to just stay in the truck, like you don't need to see this. And I walk. The crash was like 400 yards from the road, which made recovery and made everything a pain in the ass because we couldn't. It was crashing a riverbed, and we couldn't get there, like with a truck. And this is hours after. So the first responders to the crash were the Rangers. So the Navy SEALs were QRF. The Rangers were in a firefight and going after some HVTs, and they sent the Navy SEALs in to QRF them. And basically, one helicopter was empty, one helicopter was full, and they did false insertion. Not an uncommon tactic where they'd land an empty helicopter, so the enemy thought that they were landing them in two different spots. So they did a false insertion where they touched down with the empty helicopter, and then they went to land with the full helicopter, and it was just a lucky RPG shot, like hit the tail rotor, and the helicopter fell out of the sky. And so I got there, and I remember like there was a pile of bodies already. We didn't have body bags yet, and like the first thing was like I hear a ranger's like, oh, I found a leg, it's in the fire, but it's too hot to grab. And I heard another guy like, just let it burn. I'm like, oh shit, like this is real, and that ended up being probably the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. So we recovered, we bagged and recovered all the casualties, and some of them, I mean, you couldn't tell the Afghans from the Americans sometimes, and sometimes you could. Sometimes you were just putting pieces in bags because that's what it was a mixture of whatever, and then clearing. My job as an EOD guy was to go through and make sure there weren't any explosive hazards, but there were drop charges, grenades, magazines full of ammo, all sorts of things. So I spent about. I remember I got on scene. It's daylight, and I'm in the Tangi Valley, which is like one of the most kinetic places in Afghanistan, and it's south of Kabul, and it's like a Taliban leadership hub because it's close to Kabul, and it's in this protected valley, and it's just. But we had so many sets of air support, attack helicopters. Like we had CAG guys and Rangers up on hills, like they dropped leaflets that said, if you come out of your house, we're going to kill you. Like it was like there was no ROE that day. If, it just, and I felt so comfortable at the crash site. Like I was the first person. I started taking off my helmet and vest because it was hot as fuck out. It's August. And everyone's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, look around us. So I'm like, I've been on bases that are less secure than this site right now. Like we had every set of anything. If you said you needed something, like, hey, we need body bags, or we need water, or we need gloves, like a C-130 was dropping a speedball in an hour, whatever you needed. And the original thing was they want to blow the helicopter. All right, let's blow the helicopter into manageable pieces and take it to flatbeds, or bring torches in and cut them. And so I'm like, well, I carry 2 cases of C4 on my truck. I'm like, it's gonna take a lot of explosives. And they decided to bring another team in, and we made the decision to leave with the convoy. And mainly it was like out of exhaustion. Like we had another EOD team coming in. We had recovered all the bodies and moved them the 400 yards to the convoy. and loaded up trucks. Every truck had, had bags in it because there was just so many. We loaded up trucks, and we another EOD team was coming in, so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna just go back to my base. And so they came in and they loaded up a flatbed basically with all the explosives we had on our base, and uh, those guys helped finish the scene. And we went back. I remember, like, I didn't take, like, when I showed up, like, the Rangers that were there were pretty well on edge because they just lost their, like, they, at Shank, the special operations compound, they shared the same place, so, like, they were friends with these guys, they worked with these guys, and so I didn't, like, get a camera out and take pictures or anything, and I'm like, it's a helicopter crash, like, it's not an IED, it's not a UXO, it's not anything like that. So I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna take pictures or, like, no. I I didn't want anyone to beat me up. B, yeah, I
Yeah.
just felt disrespectful. So I get back, and I remember the EOD battalion at Bagram calls me, and they're like, "All right, when can we expect your report?" And I'm like, "Report?" And they're like, "Yeah, are you gonna do a report on it?" I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Well, why not?" I'm like, "Well, it wasn't an EOD incident." I'm like, "They
Yeah.
have a downed aircraft assessment team, like a recovery team. They're taking pictures and doing a report." And they're like, "Well, did you take pictures that you could send us?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't." You know. And I remember the battalion, like, it was like I was in the wrong for not taking pictures or planning on doing a report, and I was just like, those guys are so out of touch. And it seemed like that a lot. Like, you send a storyboard up, and you get oh, hey, you forgot to put a period at the end of the sentence. And I'm like, you couldn't have just fucking fixed it,
Yeah.
like, uh, type of deal.
Dude, I mean, Jesus. I mean, the 705th we were in country the same time as you guys. So your unit, obviously you guys got hemmed up between Chauncey, Mays, Chris Stark, Mike Garcia, 3 KIA within an EOD unit. I don't think people realize how small these EOD units are. Back then we're talking 44 people. I mean, so 3 people in any unit is huge, but 3 people in a 44-man company, which is the size of a maneuver platoon, is
And
massive.
really
You wind
not,
up,
really 27 operational. Like, you have 9
yeah,
teams of 3, so you have 27
correct.
operational people.
Correct. And then, you wind up running Extortion 1-7, one of the largest casualty events of the war. Uh, and then you wound up doing a
It
UXO
was,
removal from a person as well, correct?
yeah, so I, uh, I got called after Extortion 1-7, and they said, hey, uh, up in Jalalabad, the 129th had some team leaders get hurt, and they need a team, so we're going to send you up there. And I'm like, okay, you know, just for a couple months to finish off the deployment. At this point, my back is pretty fucked. Like, I was coming back from missions, and the doctors at Carwell were giving me like Valium and Percocets to try. Like, I was in so much pain from when I originally got blown up, but I was just trucking through. They're like, all right, you're gonna go up to Carwell. And I'm like, okay. So I go up to or not go up to Jalalabad, up to Kogiani. I'm like, all right. So I fly, and I'm actually at Shank where my company headquarters is, and I'm waiting for my flight. And so I have my kit and stuff, and I'm sitting in our company talk, and it's like midnight, and our admin guy is on phone watch, and he answers the phone, and it's like, hey, uh, there's a piece of an RPG in a person, and they're getting medevaced. And he's like, so I take the phone call, and they tell me that, and I'm like, all right, that's weird. I'm thinking to myself, like, someone got hit with an RPG, the tail fin's probably in there, like, surely it detonated.
Yeah.
Uh, so I have my kid on. I tell him to wake up a response team or a team member and call battalion and tell them what's going on. And I drive over in a Gator, and I get to the HLZ kind of as the helicopter's landing, and I'm like, hey, I'm EOD. you know, and they just point to the helicopter. I walk up to the helicopter, and uh, the kid is still alive, and I look at him, and he's got the tail fin of the RPG sticking out over here, and then out of his back, so it made a clean hole in his left shoulder, dislocated his shoulder, and it's a PG-7, so we're talking a little under 3 inches in diameter that went through his shoulder. It didn't rupture, like his shoulder didn't split open, it made a hole. And behind him, the warhead is sticking out. So the warhead is, PG-7s have a crush cone. The way shape charge works is the void space in front. So that void space is crushed, which is also how they fire. And some of them have a self-destruct element. Well, the medic on scene had wrapped it. For some reason, he thought if he put gauze on the warhead and wrapped it with the bandage, that it would be safer to transport. So, whatever, like maybe. So he was trying to protect it. And really, what that did was not allow me to identify it. What model of PG-7 it was, whether it had a self-destruct, and I didn't know how far the guy had been shot. I had all these unknowns. All I knew is there's a guy in front of me on a litter with the RPG, uh, and I know I'm using my hands to show, but I guess, yeah, if you can visualize his shoulder just right above the heart, like right through where all those major arteries are, a 3 inch hole, to go through there and not like hit any vital organs and then dislocate his shoulder and be sticking out the back. And so they're like, EOD, what do we do? And I'm like, uh, we need to take him, we need to take him inside the hospital and take this thing out of him. And this kid is starting to kind of be like, hey man, am I going to be okay? Like you're EOD. And I'm like, I remember looking at him and I'm like, hey man, don't worry, we do this all the time. And he's like, oh, okay. And the surgeon so there's a full bird colonel who's a surgeon on Shank, and he's like, no, we can't bring him inside. And I'm like, well, let's set up a hasty OR. So they had like a corridor going into the hospital that was just basically a concrete structure, like a tunnel looking thing. And so they set up lights. Excuse me. They set up lights and stuff, and they bring them. We get a rolling gurney, we put them on that. And the first thing I did when I got to the helicopter, I remember like being like, hey, shut this helicopter down. Like I'm thinking of like static and the massive amounts of electricity that like it's probably I'm like I don't know. For some reason probably didn't even make sense. I just thought of EOD school like static and those magic EMRs. I'm like, all right, turn this helicopter off. Like we put them on a rolling gurney and we roll them into this mobile operating room, and I look up and there's like 30 people around. Some guy with the camera, which I wish I would have let that guy stay, but I look at the surgeon and I'm like, hey. And the surgeon, the whole time we were doing this surgeon is like shaking, and he's like, what is this thing gonna go off? I'm like, dude, this is an explosive warhead that's been under a lot of stress. It's pretty unpredictable. I'm like, but we don't have a choice. Our choice is we take it out of him, and hopefully he lives, or we don't and he died. Like, like what? You can't just not take it out. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, so who the fuck needs to be in here? Like, and he's like, all right, me, you, and the anesthesiologist. So it's me, the colonel, and a major who's an anesthesiologist, and we kick everybody else out. And I have some pretty cool pictures of the incident, but I'm like, all right. So naturally, the tail fin assembly won't unscrew, and I'm like thinking, like, man, I saw this special on impalements one time on the Discovery Channel, and you always want to pull them through the same way that they traveled. So I'm like, the fins are open, but you can't, try and fold them in. And so I asked for bolt cutters, and they give me like the biggest fucking set of bolt cutters I've ever seen in my life. And I'm trying to cut the fin assembly off the back, and it won't cut. So I end up cutting all 6 fins off individually, and then the guy's asleep at this point, and we've cut off his uniform, and so it's kind of open, and you can see that the rocket motor has pretty well cauterized the wound. Well, when I reach in and we start taking it out, so I've got gloves on, the surgeon's got gloves on, and we're kind of working together to get this warhead out, and it's all these arteries come unclogged or uncauterized, and I remember like it was my first real experience of like arterial bleeding, and it was like a pulse. I was getting shot in the face with this guy's blood. I'm like, Jesus, not even thinking about it, but I'm covered in blood. Uh, I'm getting through, like he's getting caught on ligaments in his shoulder, the sharp edges of the warhead, and I'm trying to like move the ligaments, and the surgeon's like trying to cut them, which is funny because I'm trying to be more gentle than the surgeon, but he's in a panic probably because of the blood loss. And
Yeah.
so I remember like the last ligament snapping and the RPG breaking free, and they just those 2 guys wheel him away and disappear, and I'm just standing there with this RPG in my hand, like, okay, what now? So there's an IDF bunker uh, across the way, IDF indirect fire bunker for rocket attacks, where I take that RPG and I go set it in the bunker and call back, and just at this time the team member shows up in the jerv, and so he sees me just covered in blood, and he's like, "Dude, are you all right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine, but you're not gonna believe what just happened." And we go back, to the base and uh, do a storyboard and whatever. Go to bed. Wake up the next morning, dispose of the round. They didn't want me to blow it up at night because they didn't want the base people to think they got attacked or whatever. So we waited till the
Yeah.
next morning. They actually wanted me to walk the round off. They wanted me to put it in my truck and drive it off base to a disposal site. And I'm like, I feel like I got lucky enough already. And then they asked if I would hand carry it off base, and I was like, no. I'm like, I'm gonna sandbag it and blow it up in that bunker. And so finally, lucky our battalion sergeant major was there on an RCP with another team, and they were getting back as I was driving the Gator back in the compound. So he gets out of their truck and sees me covered in blood, and Sergeant Major's like, "What the hell happened to you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you're not gonna believe it." But he's the one who ended up sticking up for me to the brigade and being like, "No, this like they're blowing it up right there." So we
Good.
blow it up. I end up going up north, helping 129th out for the rest of the deployment. I remember the last mission I did there was a long, shitty day. A truck in front of me got blown up, and uh, I go I go up to it, and the it had a crow system on it. The crow system had got blown off, and it was a Max Pro. And I don't know if you've ever seen one of those like where they caught fire and like literally the doors wouldn't open because all the doors are hydraulic powered, and they have like manual, like the back door, the ramp door has a manual crank. But if the truck gets like twisted or contorted, like, and you have a truck full of concussed people back there trying to open up a manual, like
Yeah.
release it manually, like it just doesn't, like, so a lot of people died in those trucks because they couldn't get out. Uh, and so I saw smoke coming out of it, and I get out of my truck and run up to that truck, which is what you're not really supposed to do as an EOD tech. It's clear, you should clear up to it and around it, whatever. But I climb up to the truck, and like one guy had a dislocated uh, uh, elbow, like a compound fracture, and another guy was pretty fucked up. Another guy had a broken hip. And so I help all the guys out the turret because we couldn't get any of the doors or the back. Like I was not concussed, and I couldn't get the back door to open. So
Yeah.
we help everyone out the top, and I'm lowering them all down. And those Max Pros are pretty tall.
Yeah,
and
they're
I
very
go to
tall.
like set my hands on it and lower my feet down to the side compartments so I can climb down. And there was oil from the engine on top of that,
Ah,
and my hands slipped, and on my full kit I fall down, and just two of my discs just fucking gone, uh,
yeah.
and excruciating pain. And so we have to finish this mission. So we're on our way back, and by now that we've had like three trucks get hit, and so now we have like two sets of QRF, three low boys. Our convoy's like fucking 40 vehicles long, and they're like, "Hey, EOD, uh, we saw on the camera an old blast site that we think maybe you should clear, or I don't know, suspect site that was an old blast hole, and it was around a curve in the road, and the curve was like 40 feet. It was super wide for a road, so you could drive around it. So I go up there with my Goldie, uh, and this was a road that I was running post blasts on, and I wasn't finding any evidence. So I wasn't finding any command wire. I wasn't finding any batteries. Like I probably ran 10 post blasts on this road, and I couldn't figure out how they were setting these IEDs off because I was just not finding anything. Uh, no, and I think maybe clothespin type switches, like they were running string out and pulling it from a distance
Yeah.
is the only thing. But I go up to this IED site. I clear all around it with the Goldie. I walk at 360. I don't see anything. My truck is like 20 trucks back. So I go back. I get my metal detector. I get a drop charge. I go up to it. I clear the whole site with my metal detector. Uh, I don't put the bomb suit on because like I don't have access to my truck. I put a drop charge on. Don't find any, like blow up a hole in this hole, like old hole, and don't find anything. Go back, like hand sift through everything. Don't find anything. Uh, Walk back to my truck. Uh, or not back to my truck. I walk out into the field, and I'm like, all right. I get on the radio. I say, hey, everybody drive. Everybody skirt that hole as far as you can around it. And I to the best of my ability, I can't find any you know, and everybody skirts that hole, and then an A&A, like, so every US truck drives all the way around this hole, like, obnoxiously, and then an A&A truck comes up to it. Well, they're not on our radios, so they didn't hear what I said. They drove right over that fucker, and I'm standing, 50, 100 yards away, and that thing, the blew, everybody died except for one guy, like, I don't know how, because there was nothing left of the Humvee. Like miraculously, like got blown out one of the back doors and had a concussion and walking around. But everybody else, like, uh, I look up and there was like a guy in the turret coming towards me, and so I check on him and he's dead. And I go uh, up and there's a guy with a double amputee at the blast site, and I start putting tourniquets on him. And then the medic comes up to me and he's like, "Yeah, he's dead now." Like,
Yeah.
while I was, and I'm like, "Well, shit." And I'm like, "Well, I guess I'll do the post blast." And again, I didn't find anything. And as an EOD guy, that's like your worst fear, like. And I remember, I hate to say it, but like being relieved that it wasn't us, but also you feel bad because you feel responsible for. I mean, that's your job, and yeah, that's a tough
Yeah.
story to tell because that's a failure. You don't know. Uh, so I get, and my back is in excruciating pain. I get back to the base, and the sergeant major of the base was there, and I had just pulled his guys out of a truck that was smoking, uh, and helped carry all of them to a medevac helicopter, and done two post blasts before that on his vehicles, and helped out. And all that sergeant major could say to me was, hey, you didn't do a very good job clearing that site, did you? And we had some run-ins before, and I was just like, fuck you. And I
Yeah.
got in my truck, and you're supposed to ground guide, and I just told my team member, I'm like, drive back. And the sergeant major's yelling at us, and I'm like, just start driving, he'll get out of the way. And my team member's like, and I'm like, if you don't fucking drive, I will. So he starts driving. We get to and I go to the aid station, and he comes in there and starts yelling at me, yelling. And thankfully, the medic that was on scene had made it back to the aid station, and the colonel who was in there was like, Sergeant Major, you need to get out of my aid station. I'm treating a patient, referring to me.
Yeah.
And so they sent me back to my unit, and I didn't run any missions for the rest of the deployment. My back was fucked up. I got back to the States, had an MRI, and they're like, yeah, you need surgery like now. So I spent some time at San Antonio uh, getting that taken care of, and then they Featherman was pretty cool. They gave me a deferment, and I went to Picatinny a little later than I was supposed to, but I still. And the guys at Picatinny were cool because they saved my. I mean, it's a small detachment there, and they only have 8 guys, and I was holding up a spot. So basically, they kind of heard my story and were like, "Yeah, we're not gonna
Yeah.
give your slot to somebody else." So
Would you, I mean, you've been through it, man. Like, would you do it all again? Like, was joining the army the right choice? Or, I mean, like, you've been through hell.
yeah, I think so. I mean, it's given me a lot of other opportunities in life, things that you learn and do in the army, and the people are the biggest thing. Like, just when you go back to the memorial and you see everybody, or you run into EOD techs, or you always have someone to pick up the phone. Like, it's such a, you know, I can't speak for people who did other jobs in the army, but the EOD community is such a brotherhood of, like, you could meet an EOD guy that you've never met before, and you're instantly going to be willing to do anything for. And so to have built that and gain that, and all the life experiences, all the VIPs that you do, the jobs that we did, it was, I would say 100% I would do. you know there might be some different choices that you make along the way, but you can't control that.
What are you doing? So, you run a 501c nonprofit now. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and the goal and what you guys do?
Yeah, so I got medically retired. I'll kind of segue into another story. I went on another deployment uh, out of Fort Carson, and I had married and I had a kid at this point, and I was going through some marital problems, and my wife was basically leaving, and I was like, hey, I need to go home for like 2 weeks because I need to like get my house, make sure pipes don't, winter's coming. Like, I'm trying to take care of my house and do these things. And the battalion commander there was like, no. And then so my commander and me called him one day on speakerphone, and the battalion commander, I guess, didn't know I was in the office. And he's like, what's this guy's deal? How come he didn't have a plan for it? Like, I'm like, you're supposed to have a plan for your wife leaving you, or, like something like that. It's like, if you have a relative die, like, what, you don't plan for shit. And then he's like, and then he's asked my commander if I was just scared. This was my fourth or deployment. And he's like, is this guy just scared to be here? Like, and I'm like, oh, hey, sir, I'm right here on the phone if you have any questions for me. And he hung up the phone on us. And then my sergeant major, which is a testament to good leadership back in the States, Scott Weimer, he called and is like, no, he's coming home. And the colonel's like, all right, well, I want a replacement within a month. And Sergeant Major Weimer's like, okay, deal. So I go home, I deal with all the stuff, and I go to Sergeant Major, and he calls that colonel back and says, hey, we have your replacement ready. He's like, oh, who is it? He's like, Sergeant First Class Czikalla. And the colonel hung up on him. It's like, no, like, he wouldn't let me come back. And so then I found out I needed another spine surgery. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing it. And so they initiated a medical retirement or
Yeah.
med board, and I ended up getting medically retired. And they like Weimer and Colonel Schoonover were so good to me during that process and taking care of me. And uh, we had Major Schwimmer. I think she's Lieutenant Colonel now. They were my leadership at the battalion during that time, and they did such a good job of helping me through that process and getting out and finally getting mental health help and doing things that I'd put aside for so long to just keep going on deployment after deployment. Uh, and I remember even a year after I got out, like to the day, uh, Colonel Schwimmer called me and she's like, "Hey, I just wanted to check on you. You've been out for a year." And I was like, "Whoa, that's really you don't
Yeah.
see that a lot, like a random leader like." And we weren't really that close, but she just called me out of the blue, like almost like she set an alarm in her phone. Uh, but anyways, I got out and I was kind of going through a rough time, and I went on a hunt with the EOD Warrior Foundation, and I was like, man, I met some other guys who were going through similar things. I'm like, yeah, I'm living in this place that's it's in Iowa, but our lake is beautiful and we have some of the world-class hunting, like southern Iowa whitetail hunting. And I'm like, I could do something like that. So I started bringing guys fishing, like just out of my barn, a handful of guys, renting a couple boats. And then I met some other people on the lake, and we started having actual guides on fishing boats and actually catching fish instead of just partying and having a good time, which we still do that too. But it grew, and we're like, hey, let's start a 501c3. So we call it Veterans at Rathbun, and uh, we bring guys up here for. We have a big fishing event this spring. We had 32 veterans, and then like 16 guides. So 50 people that we were lodging and feeding, and we have a big fishing event, and then we do pheasant hunt, turkey hunt, deer hunt. Uh, it's given me an opportunity to really connect. I mean, it's helped me probably as much as it's helped other people, but we've got nothing but positive feedback. I mean, I I had like a really hard moment with like some Navy SEALs that came for a hunt, and they, being involved in Extortion 17, like I didn't realize how much that affected. Spent a night drinking and talking with these Navy guys, and they're like, "Man, you were there, and that like we knew everybody. They all know it, just like EOD. They're like, we knew everybody on there. We lost, and just they were instantly connected to me and the relationships that I built through this charity and the community that this community for how small it is. We have a banquet uh, in November, and this will be our third one. And the first year was like 300 people. Last year was about 400 people. But we had auction items, and it's live music, and people that have been to our banquet is like, man, like for a small town, it's crazy the amount of money that you're raising and what you're doing. Like, uh, it's almost like equivalent to the EOD memorial auction, and we're a much smaller organization, much smaller scale, but it's crazy to see the support and how like this Iowa is kind of unique. We don't have any really active duty military bases. We have some active guard and Air Force Reserve and stuff, but we don't have any big bases here. So there's not, I hate to say oversaturation, but of veterans, but there's not as many veterans as there are in other places. So it's not like when you go in Colorado Springs and ask for a donation for a veterans charity, well, there's 47 other veterans charities asking for donations. Like around here, everybody wants to help and is like all about it, and it's been pretty awesome.
Well, Joe, man, hey, thank you so much for everything you've done, for what you continue to do for veterans, for taking the time to tell your story, because these are the stories that need to get told, right? I mean, I know we talked a little bit before we started recording, but if we don't capture these stories from people in 60 years, no one's going to know the great things that people did. So thank you so much for taking the time and sitting down with me. And I hope to bump into you again next year at the EOD Memorial in May.
Sure.
And I'll buy you a coffee or a beer, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great time.
We'll do it again, man. Have a good one.
Yep, sure. You too.